The June sun peeked through the lace curtains, casting intricate patterns on the kitchen floor. Clara, standing at the sink, absent-mindedly scrubbed an already clean plate, her mind elsewhere. She thought back to the evening before, another tense family reunion at the parents of Pedro, her husband. As usual, his mother-in-law, Dona Marta, had managed to slip in a few scathing remarks about him, cleverly hidden under a veneer of politeness. "Pedro, my darling," Marta had said in her honeyed voice, "you look tired. Is Clara taking good care of you?" An innocent smile had accompanied these words, but Clara had felt the venom escaping from it. Clara sighed, finally putting the plate down. She wondered how long she could endure this situation. Since her marriage to Pedro 2 years ago, Marta had never hidden her disagreement. At first, Clara had put it down to classic maternal jealousy, thinking that time would sort things out. But instead of getting better, the situation seemed to get worse day by day. The sound of the front door opening pulled Clara from her thoughts. Pedro entered the kitchen, his face lighting up at the sight of his wife. "Hello, my love," he said, kissing her tenderly. "Is everything okay? You look worried." Clara hesitated for a moment. Should she share her concerns with Pedro? She didn't want to create tension between him and his mother, but the weight of this situation was becoming heavier and heavier to bear alone. "It's just, your mother," she began softly. "I feel like nothing I do is ever good enough for her." Pedro sighed, running a hand through his hair. I know. She can be difficult. But she'll accept you eventually, I'm sure. You just have to give her time." Clara nodded, unconvinced. How much longer would it take? What if Marta never accepted him? In the following days, Clara noticed that Marta's interventions were becoming more and more frequent and daring. She called almost daily, always under the pretense of talking to Pedro, but invariably finding a way to slip in a derogatory comment about Clara. "Oh, Pedro, I hope Clara hasn't burned dinner yet," Marta laughed over the phone. "You know, my son deserves someone who really knows how to take care of him." Clara, who could hear the conversation from the next room, felt her heart sink. She was an excellent cook, and Pedro loved her dishes. Why was Marta persisting like this? One Saturday afternoon, while Clara was shopping at the local supermarket, she saw a familiar figure in the produce aisle. It was Ricardo, a friend of the couple whom she had not seen for several weeks. Tall, attractive, with a charming smile, Ricardo had always been friendly towards Clara, sometimes even a little too much for some people's tastes. "Clara," he exclaimed happily. "What a pleasant surprise to see you here." They chatted for a few minutes, exchanging news. Clara noticed that Ricardo seemed particularly interested in her personal life, asking questions about her work, her hobbies, and even her relationship with Pedro. "And how are things going with the mother-in-law?" he asked with a knowing wink. Clara was surprised by this question. How did Ricardo know about his problems with Marta? She didn't remember talking about it with him. "Oh, as usual," she replied evasively. "Relationships with mothers-in-law are rarely simple." Ricardo nodded, a look of understanding on his face. "If you ever need to talk, don't hesitate. I'm here for you, Clara." On the way back, Clara couldn't help but think about this meeting. Something in Ricardo's attitude had made her uneasy, but she couldn't put her finger on it. In the following days, Clara noticed that Ricardo seemed to appear more often in their lives. He was present at a dinner with mutual friends, he met them by chance during a trip to the cinema, and he even began to participate in family gatherings at Pedro's parents' house. What struck Clara the most was Marta's attitude towards Ricardo. She, who was usually so cold towards the couple's friends, seemed to have a special affection for him. She invited him over regularly, showered him with compliments and, strangely enough, always seemed to find a way to place him next to Clara at meals. One evening, while Clara was helping clear the table after a dinner at Pedro's parents' house, she overheard a conversation between Marta and Ricardo in the kitchen. "She looks unhappy, don't you think?" Marta whispered. "Pedro deserves so much better. Someone who really understands him, who shares his values." "You may be right," Ricardo replied in a low voice. "I might try talking to her, seeing how she really feels about her marriage." Clara felt her heart stop. Was it possible? Was Marta really trying to push Ricardo into her arms to sabotage his marriage? The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions for Clara. She oscillated between anger, disbelief, and deep sadness. How could her own mother-in-law plot against her like this? And Ricardo, whom she considered a friend, how could he play this game? Clara began to notice details she had previously ignored. Ricardo's intense glances, his attempts to create moments of intimacy, the excuses he found to be alone with her. Everything took on a new and disturbing meaning. She wondered if she should tell Pedro about it. But how to explain it to him without concrete proof? What if he didn't believe her? After all, it was his mother. One afternoon, when Clara came home from work, she found Ricardo waiting for her outside her house. Her heart began to beat faster, a mixture of fear and anger rising within her. "Clara," he said with a smile that was intended to be charming, "I was passing by and I thought it would be an opportunity to chat a little, just the two of us." Clara took a deep breath. It was time to set things straight. "Ricardo," she began in a firm voice, "I think we need to talk seriously." Clara stared at Ricardo, her heart racing. The time had come to face the truth, as unpleasant as it was. "Ricardo," she began in a firm voice, "I need to know what's really going on. Why have you been around so much lately? And what is your connection to Marta?" Ricardo looked momentarily unsettled. He opened his mouth, closed it, then sighed deeply. "Clara, it's not what you think." "And what do you think I'm thinking?" Clara retorted, crossing her arms. "Enlighten me, please." Ricardo ran a hand through his hair, visibly uncomfortable. "Look, I didn't want it to happen like this. Marta approached me a few weeks ago. She was worried about Pedro. She thought that your marriage was going through a rough patch." Clara felt a wave of anger rise within her. "And since when do marital problems, if there are problems, concern my mother-in-law?" I know, Ricardo agreed. "I should have refused from the start. But Marta was so convincing. She said that Pedro was unhappy, that he deserved better. She asked me to get closer to you." Ricardo's words hit Clara like a punch. His suspicions were therefore justified. Marta had really orchestrated all of this. "And you accepted?" Clara asked, incredulous. "You agreed to play this unhealthy game?" Ricardo looked down, ashamed. "I'm not proud of myself, Clara. At first, I really thought I could help. Maybe if I got closer to you, I could figure out what was wrong with your relationship. But the more time I spent with you, the more I realized that Marta was wrong. Your marriage is not in crisis. She is the one creating problems where there are none." Clara sank onto the bench in front of the house, her legs trembling. "I can't believe it. How could she do this?" Ricardo sat next to her, keeping a respectful distance. "I think she's afraid of losing her son. She sees you as a threat to her relationship with Pedro. It's irrational, I know, but that's how she feels." "And you?" Clara asked, looking him straight in the eyes. "What was your interest in all this?" Ricardo looked away, embarrassed. I've always had a weakness for you, Clara. When Marta suggested that I get closer to you, a part of me saw it as an opportunity. But I realize now how much it was stupid and disrespectful." A heavy silence settled between them. Clara was digesting all this information, trying to make sense of this absurd situation. "I'm sorry, Clara," Ricardo said again after a moment. "So sorry. I'm going to move away. I won't bother you and Pedro anymore. And I'm going to tell Marta that I won't participate in her schemes anymore." Clara nodded, still in shock. "I think it's the best thing to do, yes." As Ricardo got up to leave, Clara stopped him. "Ricardo, thank you for being honest. It was the right thing to do." He nodded, a faint smile on his lips, before walking away. Clara watched him leave, a mixture of relief and apprehension washing over her. She finally had the truth, but what should she do with it now? In the evening, when Pedro came home from work, he found Clara sitting in the dark of the living room. He turned on the light, surprised. "Clara, is everything okay?" She looked up at him, her face betraying her inner torment. "Pedro, we need to talk. It's important." Pedro sat down next to her, worried. "What's going on, my love?" Clara took a deep breath and began to tell. She spoke of her suspicions, of the surprise conversation between Marta and Ricardo, and finally of the latter's confession. As she spoke, she saw Pedro's face change from worry to disbelief to anger. "I can't believe it," he whispered when she finished. "My own mother. How could she do this?" Clara placed a hand on Pedro's. "I know this is hard to hear. I was hesitant to tell you about it, but I think you had the right to know." Pedro stood up abruptly, pacing around the living room. "I have to talk to him. I have to ask him for an explanation." "Pedro," Clara said softly, "I understand that you are angry. But perhaps we should take a step back before confronting your mother. We need to think about the best way to handle this situation." Pedro stopped, looking at his wife in awe. "How can you be so calm? After everything she put you through?" Clara smiled weakly. "Believe me, I'm far from calm inside. But I also know that your mother is a part of your life, of our lives. We can't just erase her from our existence. We have to find a way to resolve this problem, for the good of all." Pedro sat down next to Clara again, taking her in his arms. "You're right, as always. But I can't let this continue. We need to set clear boundaries with my mother." They spent much of the night discussing, developing strategies to deal with this delicate situation. They finally decided to take a little distance from Marta, time to digest these revelations and decide on the best approach to adopt. The following days were tense. Marta called regularly, surprised not to have any news. Pedro responded briefly, citing a busy schedule. Clara, for her part, avoided all contact with her mother-in-law, with a heavy heart. A week after Ricardo's revelation, while Clara and Pedro were having breakfast, the front doorbell rang. Pedro went to open the door, and Clara heard Marta's voice echoing in the hallway. "Pedro, my darling. I was so worried about not having any news. I brought croissants for breakfast." Clara froze, cup of coffee in hand. She wasn't ready for this confrontation, not now. Pedro appeared in the kitchen, looking embarrassed, followed closely by Marta. The latter stopped short when she saw Clara. "Oh, Clara," she said in a falsely happy tone. "I didn't know you'd be here. Hope I'm not disturbing." Clara forced a smile. "Hello, Marta. No, you're not disturbing. We were just having breakfast." An uncomfortable silence settled in the kitchen. Pedro looked alternately at his mother and his wife, visibly uncomfortable. "Mom," he finally began, "we need to talk about something important." Marta sat at the table, her smile faltering slightly. "Of course, darling. What is it about?" Pedro took a deep breath. "We know about Ricardo. We know you asked him to get closer to Clara." Marta's face fell. She looked at Clara, then at Pedro, searching for words. I don't understand what you're talking about, Pedro." "Please, Mom," Pedro said in a firm voice. "Don't lie. Ricardo told us everything." Marta seemed to slump in her chair. "I just wanted to protect you, Pedro. I thought that Clara, that your marriage." "Our marriage is going great, Mom," Pedro interrupted. "The only problem here is your behavior. You have no right to interfere in our lives like that." Tears began to flow down Marta's cheeks. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I thought I was doing the right thing." Clara, touched in spite of herself by her mother-in-law's distress, intervened gently. "Marta, we understand that you are worried about Pedro. But what you did was hurtful and disrespectful. We are adults who can manage our own relationship." Marta nodded, wiping away her tears. "I know. I'm really sorry. I was afraid of losing my son, of no longer having a place in his life. But I realize now that that's exactly what I'm risking by doing this." Pedro took his mother's hand. "You won't lose me, Mom. But you have to accept that Clara is part of my life now. She is my wife, and I love her. We need you to respect our relationship." Marta nodded, looking at Clara with remorseful eyes. "Clara, I know I've been horrible to you. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I hope that one day we can start on better footing." Clara took a deep breath. "It won't be easy, Marta. You have hurt us deeply. But I am willing to try, for Pedro, for our family. However, things need to change. We need to establish clear boundaries. Pedro shook Clara's hand, grateful. We think it would be good to take some distance for a while. Until things calm down and we can all think about how we want to move forward. Marta nodded, resigned. I understand. I will respect your decision. As she got up to leave, Marta turned one last time to Clara and Pedro. I'm so sorry. I promise I'll try. I hope one day you can forgive me. After Marta left, Clara and Pedro remained silent for a moment, digesting what had just happened. Finally, Clara snuggled into her husband's arms. It'll be okay, she asked softly. Pedro kissed Clara's forehead. It's going to be okay. Together we can overcome anything. They knew it would be a long road to rebuild trust and restore family harmony. But for the first time in a long time, they felt like they were moving in the right direction. The truth had been revealed, the cards were on the table. Now all that remained was to heal and move forward, one step at a time. The weeks following the confrontation with Marta were marked by a tense calm. Clara and Pedro had decided to limit their interactions with her, responding only briefly to messages and calls, avoiding impromptu visits. This distance, although necessary, weighed heavily on the family atmosphere. One Sunday morning, while Clara was preparing lunch and Pedro was reading quietly in the living room, the doorbell rang, shattering the tranquility of their home. Pedro got up to open the door, and Clara heard familiar voices in the hall. Her heart sank when she recognized Marta's, accompanied by those of Pedro's father and his sister. Surprise! Marta exclaimed as she entered the kitchen, a big smile on her lips. We thought it would be a good idea to stop by for a family lunch. It's been so long since we all got together. Clara, taken by surprise, exchanged a worried look with Pedro. The latter seemed equally surprised and uncomfortable. Mom, Pedro began in a tense voice, we agreed to take a little distance, remember? Marta's smile faltered slightly. Oh, come on, Pedro. That was weeks ago. Surely we can move on now? Family is the most important thing, after all. Clara felt anger rising within her, but tried to remain calm. Marta, we appreciate your visit, but a little advance notice would have been appreciated. We haven't prepared enough food for everyone. Don't worry about it, darling, Marta replied in a condescending tone. I brought lots of things. I know how busy you are, I didn't want to put more work on you. Clara gritted her teeth, feeling the hidden spike in her mother-in-law's words. She looked at Pedro, hoping he would intervene, but he seemed paralyzed by the situation. Pedro's father, sensing the tension, tried to ease the atmosphere. So, how's work going, Clara? I heard you have a big project going on. Before Clara could respond, Marta intervened. Oh, you know how it is, Dad. Clara is always so busy with her work. I hope it doesn't take too much of a toll on your married life, do you, Pedro? Pedro, finally coming out of his torpor, spoke. Mom, that's enough. Clara's work is important to her, and I fully support her. Marta looked offended. But anyway, Pedro, I'm just worried about you. A woman should know how to balance her career and family life. Clara, no longer able to contain her frustration, decided it was time to set things straight once and for all. Marta, I think it's time we have a frank conversation. A heavy silence fell over the room. Pedro's father and his sister exchanged confused looks, obviously not understanding the seriousness of the situation. Clara took a deep breath before continuing. Since the beginning of my marriage to Pedro, you have constantly criticized and belittled me. You even tried to sabotage our relationship by pushing Ricardo to get closer to me. This behavior is unacceptable and hurtful, not only to me, but also for Pedro and for our entire family. Marta, taken off guard by this direct confrontation, tried to defend herself. I don't know what you're talking about, Clara. Everything I did was out of love for my son. If you feel threatened by that, maybe you have something to worry about. To reproach. Pedro interjected, his voice trembling with suppressed anger. Mom, stop this immediately. We know what you did with Ricardo. He told us everything. Pedro's sister, shocked, exclaimed, What? What are you talking about? Clara, feeling that it was time to put everything on the table, calmly explained the situation to her in-laws. She recounted Marta's incessant comments, her attempts at manipulation, and finally the plan with Ricardo. As she spoke, she saw the faces of her father-in-law and sister-in-law change from confusion to disbelief to dismay. When she finished, Pedro's father turned to Marta, looking deeply disappointed. "Is it true, Marta? Did you really do all that?" Marta, cornered, burst into tears. "You don't understand. I just wanted to protect my son. This girl is taking him away from us, from his family." "No, Mom," Pedro intervened in a firm voice. "You're the one who's pushing me away with your behavior. Clara is part of my life now, she's my family as much as you are. If you can't accept it, you'll be the one to push us away." A heavy silence settled in the room. Clara, despite her anger and frustration, could not help but feel compassion for Marta. She understood the fear of losing her child, even if she couldn't excuse her actions. "Marta," she said softly, "I know that you love Pedro more than anything. I love him too. We are not in competition. There is room in his life for both of us. But for that works, we must respect each other." Pedro's father nodded. "Clara is right, Marta. What you did is inexcusable. You need to apologize and work to change." Marta, her eyes red with tears, looked at each member of her family in turn. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cause so much trouble. I was so afraid of losing my baby boy." Pedro approached his mother and took her in his arms. "You will never lose me, Mom. But you have to understand that Clara is part of my life now. She is not a threat to you or to our family. She enriches it." Pedro's sister, who had remained silent until then, spoke up. "Mom, I think it would be good for you to talk to someone. A therapist perhaps. To help you deal with your emotions and accept these changes in our family." Marta nodded, defeated. "You're right. I'm so sorry for all the hurt I've caused. Clara, Pedro, I hope one day you can forgive me." Clara came closer and took Marta's hand. "It'll take time, Marta. But if you're really willing to put in the effort, then we can try to rebuild our relationship on a better footing." The rest of the day passed in a strange atmosphere, a mixture of residual tension and relief. The family shared the meal that Clara had prepared, speaking quietly about neutral subjects, carefully avoiding returning to the confrontation. Before leaving, Marta approached Clara one last time. "I'm sincerely sorry, my dear. I promise to do better in the future. Maybe we could have coffee together next week? Just the two of us?" Clara hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Okay, Marta. We can try." Once the family left, Clara and Pedro collapsed on the couch, emotionally exhausted. "I'm proud of you," Pedro whispered, hugging Clara to him. "You were amazing today." Clara smiled weakly. "We were incredible together. It was difficult, but necessary." They stayed like that for a moment, savoring the newfound calm of their home. They knew it would be a long way before things really improved with Marta, but for the first time in a long time, they felt like they were moving in the right direction. "Do you think this will work?" Clara asked, breaking the silence. "Do you think your mother can really change?" Pedro sighed. "I hope so. It won't be easy, and there will probably be relapses. But I think she really had an electroshock today. And then, she saw that the whole family agreed with us. It should help her realize that she needs to change." Clara nodded thoughtfully. "I agree with trying to rebuild a relationship with her. But we need to remain vigilant and maintain clear boundaries." "Absolutely," Pedro agreed. "We're a team, you and me. We'll face this together, like everything else." As the sun began to set, bathing the living room in golden light, Clara and Pedro stood together, reflecting on the day's events and what the future held for them. They knew the road would be long and sometimes difficult, but they were ready to travel it together, stronger and more united than ever. The days following the family confrontation were marked by a strange tranquility. Clara and Pedro navigated this new territory carefully, aware that the slightest misstep could reignite the barely eased tensions. Marta's silence was both a relief and a source of worry. Did she really understand the gravity of her actions, or was she simply preparing her next offensive? One evening, while they were having a quiet dinner, Pedro put down his fork and looked at Clara seriously. I think we should consider family therapy, he said softly. Clara looked up from her plate, surprised. With your mother, you mean? Pedro nodded. Yes, with my mom, my dad, my sister, all of us. I think we need help navigating this situation. What happened? It's not something we can just sweep it under the rug and forget. Clara also put down her fork, thinking about the proposition. Part of her just wanted to move on, put the past behind them and move on. But she knew Pedro was right. The wounds were too deep to heal alone. You're probably right, she admitted. But how do you think your mother will react to this idea? And the rest of your family? Pedro sighed. I don't know. My mother will probably be reluctant at first. She's never been one to talk openly about her feelings. But I think the confrontation has shaken her enough that she's open to the idea. As for my father and my sister, I think they will understand how toxic the situation was. Clara nodded slowly. Okay. If you think it's the best thing to do, I support you. But I want you to know that it won't be easy for me either. The idea of having to go through all that again, of talk about it openly in front of your whole family. Pedro took Clara's hand in his. I know, my love. And I promise I'll be there every step of the way. We're a team, remember? The next day, Pedro contacted a family therapist recommended by a colleague. Dr. Moro had an excellent reputation and experience in managing intergenerational conflicts. They made an appointment for a first session the following week. Informing the rest of the family was the trickiest part. As expected, Marta was initially opposed to the idea. Therapy? But what for? We don't need a stranger to solve our family problems, she exclaimed over the phone. Pedro remained calm. Mom, we need help to get over what happened. This isn't a punishment, it's an opportunity to heal and become a stronger family. After long discussions and a few days of reflection, Marta finally accepted, although reluctantly. Pedro's father and sister, on the other hand, welcomed the idea with relief, recognizing that the family needed professional help. The day of the first session arrived sooner than expected. Clara felt her stomach drop as she entered Dr. Moro's office. The room was warm, decorated in calming tones, with comfortable armchairs arranged in a circle. Marta was already there, sitting stiff as a rod, looking nervous. Pedro's father and his sister arrived soon after, completing the group. Dr. Moro, a man of around 50 with a kind face, welcomed them warmly. Welcome everyone. I know it's not easy being here today, but I want to congratulate you for taking this first step. It's an act of courage and love for your family. He began by establishing a few ground rules: mutual respect, listening without interruption, honesty. Then, he asked everyone to share what had brought them here today. When Clara's turn came, she took a deep breath. I'm here because I love Pedro, and I want our marriage to have a chance to succeed. But for that, we need a family that supports us, not sabotages us. Marta flinched at these words, but remained silent. Pedro continued, I'm here because I refuse to choose between my wife and my family. I want us to find a way to coexist harmoniously. When it was Marta's turn, she hesitated for a long time before speaking. I guess I'm here because I'm scared. Scared of losing my son, scared of no longer having a place in his life. Dr. Moro nodded in understanding. It's a very common fear, Marta. But do you think your actions helped bring Pedro closer to you, or pushed him away? Marta looked down, tears beginning to fall. I pushed him away. I see him now. Over the course of the following sessions, everyone had the opportunity to express their feelings, their fears, their hopes. It wasn't always easy. There were moments of tension, tears, sometimes even screams. But little by little, mutual understanding began to emerge. Clara learned that Marta's fear of losing her son was rooted in her own family history. She had lost her mother at a young age and had always feared being abandoned. This revelation did not justify his actions, but it made them more understandable. For her part, Marta began to see Clara not as a rival, but as an ally in Pedro's happiness. She realized that love was not a limited resource, that Pedro could love his wife without loving his mother any less. Pedro, for his part, learned to establish clearer boundaries with his mother, while ensuring her love and support. He realized that he had sometimes avoided conflict to Clara's detriment, and committed to being a better partner and a better son. Pedro's father and his sister also played a crucial role in this healing process. They learned to no longer be passive spectators of family conflicts, but to intervene constructively to maintain family harmony. After several months of therapy, Dr. Moreau offered them a final exercise. Everyone had to write a letter to the other members of the family, expressing their feelings, their regrets, and their hopes for the future. Then, during the last session, they read these letters aloud. Marta's letter to Clara was particularly moving. "My dear Clara, I can never apologize enough for the hurt I caused you. My fear and selfishness have blinded me, preventing me from seeing the wonderful woman you are and the happiness you bring to my son. I deeply regret my actions and promise to do my best to be the stepmother you deserve. I hope that one day you can see me not as a threat, but as an ally and maybe even a friend. I am grateful for your patience and strength, and I am proud to have you as my daughter-in-law." There was not a dry eye in the room after reading this letter. Clara, moved, stood up and hugged Marta, a gesture that would have been unthinkable a few months earlier. At the end of the session, Dr. Moreau looked at them all with pride. "You did a remarkable job. It wasn't easy, but you chose the harder path, the path of healing and forgiveness. Your family is stronger now than it has ever been." Leaving the office that day, Clara and Pedro knew they had made the right decision. The road had been long and difficult, but the result was worth it. Their family wasn't perfect, no family is, but it was united, resilient, and ready to face the challenges ahead together. That evening, as they were getting ready for dinner, Clara received a message from Marta. "How about lunch, just the two of you next week? I'd like to get to know you better." Clara smiles as she reads the message. She looked at Pedro, who was observing her curiously. "Your mother is inviting me to lunch," she explained. Pedro raised an eyebrow, surprised. "And you will accept?" Clara thought for a moment before answering. "Yes, I think so. It won't be easy, and there will probably be some awkward moments. But it's a new start, right? It's what we've worked for." Pedro smiled and kissed her tenderly. "I'm so proud of you, of us, of our family. We've come a long way." Clara nodded, feeling a wave of gratitude wash over her. The decision to pursue family therapy had been difficult, but it had opened the way to a brighter future. She knew there were still challenges ahead, but for the first time in a long time, she looked toward them with hope and confidence. The café Marta chose for their lunch was a quaint little establishment in the city center, far from the places they usually frequented. Clara appreciated the gesture. It was as if Marta wanted to create a new framework for their relationship, far from the painful memories of the past. When Clara arrived, Marta was already there, sitting at a table near the window. She looked nervous, fiddling with her napkin, her gaze darting from one point of the room to another. As soon as she saw Clara, she stood up awkwardly, not really knowing how to greet her. "Hello, Marta," Clara said with a shy smile. "Clara, my dear, I'm so glad you accepted my invitation," Marta replied, finally opting for a light hug. They sat down, an awkward silence settling between them. Clara immersed herself in the menu, more to have something to do than out of any real interest in its contents. I wasn't sure what to order," Marta began, breaking the silence. "I thought it would be nice to explore a new place together." Clara looked up from the menu, touched by her mother-in-law's effort. "It's a great idea. I really like the atmosphere here." They placed their order, then found themselves face to face again, without the protective shield of the menus. "Clara," Marta said, her voice shaking slightly, "I wanted to thank you again for agreeing to this meeting. I know it couldn't have been an easy decision after everything that happened." Clara nodded, choosing her words carefully. "It wasn't easy, that's true. But I think it's important. For Pedro, for our family, and for us too." Marta took a deep breath. "You're right. I wanted to talk to you in person, away from the pressure of therapy or the rest of the family. I wanted you to know how sorry I am for all the hurt I've caused." Marta's eyes filled with tears. "I was selfish and cruel. I was so obsessed with the idea of losing Pedro that I didn't see that I was pushing him away from me. And worse, I made you suffer, you who make him so happy." Clara felt her throat tighten. Despite all the pain of the past, seeing the sincerity in Marta's eyes touched her deeply. "Marta," she said softly, "I'm not going to pretend that what you did didn't hurt. It was very difficult. But I see your efforts, I hear your sincerity. And I want to go forward." Marta wiped her tears. "You are so generous, Clara. I don't know if I would have had this strength in your place." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of their dishes. They ate in silence for a few minutes, each digesting the emotion of the moment. "Tell me about yourself, Clara," Marta said suddenly. "I realize that despite all these years, I don't really know you. I was so focused on what I thought you were that I never took the time to find out who you really are." Clara was surprised by this request, but pleasantly so. She began to talk about her childhood, her studies, her passions. Marta listened attentively, asking questions, showing sincere interest. As the conversation progressed, the atmosphere relaxed. They discovered unsuspected commonalities, a shared love for photography, a passion for Italian cuisine, a weakness for old black and white films. "You know," Marta said, laughing, "if I had taken the time to really get to know you earlier, I would have realized how perfect you are for Pedro. You have so much in common." Clara smiles. "It's true. But you know, Marta, Pedro also has a lot of you in him. His kindness, his patience, these are qualities he gets from you." Marta seemed touched by these words. "Thank you, Clara. It means a lot to me." As they finished their dessert, Marta took Clara's hand. "I know it will take time to rebuild the trust between us. But I hope this lunch can be the start of a new relationship. I would really like to learn how to be a better mother-in-law, and maybe, to be a friend one day." Clara shook Marta's hand in return. "I'd like that too, Marta." As they left the cafe, they promised to repeat the experience. It was only a small step, but it was a step in the right direction. The weeks that followed saw a gradual transformation in the family dynamic. Sunday dinners, once a source of tension, became eagerly awaited moments. Marta made visible efforts to include Clara, soliciting her opinion, valuing her contributions. One day, while they were preparing the meal together in Marta's kitchen, the latter turned to Clara with a mischievous smile. "You know, I always kept the recipe for Pedro's favorite cake a secret. It was like my little power, something that he and I shared exclusively." She paused, seeming to weigh her words. "But I think it's time I pass it on to you. After all, you're the one cooking for him now." Clara was deeply moved by this gesture. It wasn't just a recipe that Marta shared, it was a part of her bond with her son, a way of telling Clara that she fully accepted him into the family. Pedro, witnessing these changes, could not hide his joy. One evening, when they returned from a particularly pleasant dinner at his parents' house, he took Clara in his arms. "I never imagined seeing you and my mother this close," he said, his eyes shining. "It's like all my dreams have come true." Clara smiles, sharing his happiness. "It's true, it's incredible. There are still difficult times, of course, but I feel like we're moving in the right direction." Their happiness was put to the test a few months later, when Clara and Pedro announced that they were expecting their first child. The news was greeted with immense joy by the whole family, but Clara couldn't help but worry. How would Marta react to this major change? His fears were quickly allayed. Far from being possessive or intrusive, Marta was incredibly supportive. She offered her help without imposing herself, respecting the young couple's space while remaining available. One day, when Clara was in her 7th month of pregnancy, Marta invited her for a surprise. When Clara arrived at her mother-in-law's house, she discovered that Marta had organized a small, intimate, and warm baby shower. "I know your mother is far away," Marta said, welcoming her, "so I thought you might like to have a special time here too." Clara, overwhelmed by emotion, hugged Marta. "Thank you," she whispered, tears in her eyes. "It means so much to me." The birth of little Thomas was a moment of pure joy for the whole family. Seeing Marta hold her grandson for the first time, her eyes filled with love and wonder, was a moment Clara would always cherish. In the weeks that followed, Marta proved to be a caring and respectful grandmother. She was there when Clara and Pedro needed help, but also knew how to withdraw to give them their family privacy. One evening, when Thomas was finally asleep after a particularly difficult day, Clara found Marta sitting in the living room, leafing through an old photo album. "Look," Marta said, showing Clara a photo, "that's Pedro when he was Thomas' age. He already had that mischievous little smile." Clara sat next to her mother-in-law, fascinated by these glimpses of the past. "He looks so much like Thomas," she remarked. Marta nodded, then turned to Clara with a serious look. "You know, when Pedro was a baby, my own mother-in-law was, let's say, very present. She always had an opinion on how I should raise my son. It drove me crazy." She paused, seeming to search for words. "I promised myself that I would never be like that with my stepdaughter. And then, when Pedro married you, I completely forgot that promise. I did exactly what I hated being done to me." Clara took Marta's hand in hers. "But you have changed, Marta. You have become the mother-in-law and grandmother that every family would dream of." Marta smiles, her eyes moist. "Thank you, my dear. It's because of your patience and strength. You gave me the chance to become a better person." They stayed like that for a moment, hand in hand, looking at the family photos. Clara realized how much their relationship had evolved. From distrust and hostility, they had moved on to sincere friendship, to a strong family bond. That night, as she lay next to Pedro, Clara felt filled with gratitude. The road had been long and sometimes painful, but the result was worth it. Their family wasn't perfect, no family is, but it was united, resilient, and full of love. "What are you thinking about?" Pedro murmured, half asleep. Clara smiled in the darkness. "I think how lucky we are. We've been through some tough times, but look where we are now. Our son is surrounded by love. Your mother has become a valuable ally. We made it, Pedro. We really succeeded." Pedro hugged Clara against him. "Yes, my love. We succeeded. And it's largely thanks to you, your strength and your heart." As they fell asleep, lulled by the peaceful breathing of their son in the next room, Clara felt at peace. The hurts of the past had turned into valuable lessons, and the future looked bright. Reconciliation hadn't been easy, but it had opened the way to a happiness she never thought possible. The years passed, and Clara and Pedro's family continued to flourish. Thomas, their eldest son, was now a lively 5-year-old boy, and he had been joined 2 years earlier by his little sister, Elise. The family dynamic had found a harmonious balance, with Marta fully playing her role as a loving grandmother without encroaching on the young couple's space. One sunny Sunday morning, while the whole family was gathered for the traditional Sunday brunch at Marta's, Clara observed the scene with a mixture of joy and wonder. Thomas was playing cards with his grandfather in a corner of the living room, laughing out loud with each game he won. Elise, sitting on Marta's lap, listened attentively to her grandmother telling her a story, her eyes wide with wonder. Pedro, for his part, was chatting happily with his sister who had just announced her pregnancy. Clara headed to the kitchen to make more coffee, and was surprised to find Marta following her, Elise still in her arms. "Can I help you with something, sweetheart?" Marta asked with a warm smile. Clara couldn't help but smile back. "No, it's going to be okay, Marta. Enjoy your time with Elise." Marta nodded, but did not leave the kitchen. She seemed to want to say something. "You know, Clara," she began softly, "I was just thinking about how far we've come." Clara paused in her coffee preparation, feeling the importance of the moment. "That's true," she agreed. "We've had quite a journey, haven't we?" Marta nodded, her eyes shining with emotion. "I can't thank you enough for your patience and strength. You gave our family a second chance that maybe we didn't deserve." Clara was touched by these words. She approached Marta and placed a hand on her arm. "We did it together, Marta. You made a huge effort too." Elise, feeling the emotion of the moment, wrapped her little arms around her grandmother. Marta tenderly kissed her granddaughter's forehead before continuing. "I wanted to tell you something, Clara. Something I should have told you a long time ago." Clara waited patiently, feeling that Marta needed to take her time. "I'm proud to have you as my daughter-in-law," Marta finally said, her voice trembling slightly. "You are a wonderful mother, an amazing wife to Pedro, and you have become like a daughter to me. I know it took me a while to realize that, but I wanted you to know that." Clara's eyes filled with tears. Without a word, she took Marta in her arms, careful not to crush Elise between them. They stayed like that for a moment, sharing an embrace that was worth more than 1,000 words. Their moment was interrupted by the arrival of Pedro in the kitchen. "Is everything okay here?" he asked, surprised to find his wife and mother in tears. Clara and Marta separated, laughing, wiping away their tears. "Everything is perfectly fine," Clara replied with a beaming smile. The rest of the day passed in an atmosphere of happiness and harmony. As they drove home that evening, the children asleep in the back of the car, Pedro turned to Clara. "What happened in the kitchen with my mother?" he asked softly. Clara smiles, thinking back to this precious moment. "Let's just say we had a lovely conversation. Your mother has truly become someone special to me, Pedro." Pedro took Clara's hand and brought it to his lips. "I'm so happy to hear that. You know, there are times when I still pinch myself to make sure I'm not dreaming. Seeing my wife and mother this close is more than I could have never dared to hope." In the following days, Clara thought a lot about her conversation with Marta. She realized that she too had things to say to her mother-in-law. After talking with Pedro, she decided to organize a little surprise. A few weeks later, Clara invited Marta for lunch, just the two of them. She chose the same cafe where they had had their first real conversation, years ago. When Marta arrived, she was surprised to see the table decorated with care, a small gift package placed on it. "What is all this?" Marta asked, intrigued. Clara smiled, suddenly a little nervous. "I've been thinking a lot about our conversation the other day, and I wanted to do something special for you." She gently pushed the package towards Marta. "Open it, please." Marta carefully unwrapped the gift to discover a beautiful photo album. Opening it, she saw that it was filled with family photos, images of her with Pedro as a child, photos of Clara and Pedro's wedding, precious moments with Thomas and Elise. "Oh, Clara," Marta whispered, tears in her eyes. "Turn the last page," Clara encouraged gently. Marta did so and found a handwritten letter. She began to read, "Dear Marta, when I married Pedro, I knew I was gaining not only a wonderful husband, but also a new family. What I didn't know was how important this family would become to me. Our path has not always been easy. We had our moments of doubt, anger, and sadness. But we also had moments of joy, laughter, and love. And that's what matters most. You told me the other day that you were proud to have me as your daughter-in-law. I want you to know that I am just as proud to have you as my mother-in-law. You have become much more than that to me. You are a friend, a confidant, and yes, a second mother. Thank you for having the courage to change, for opening your heart and giving me a chance. Thank you for being such a wonderful grandmother to Thomas and Elise. Thank you for simply being you. I am grateful every day for the family we have built together. With all my love, Clara." When Marta finished reading, she was openly crying. Clara got up and came to embrace him. "Thank you," Marta whispered between sobs. "Thank you for everything." That day truly marked the beginning of a new chapter in their relationship. The years that followed were not without their challenges, of course. There were still disagreements, moments of tension. But the strong foundation they had built allowed them to overcome each obstacle with grace and understanding. Marta became a valuable ally for Clara, especially when the latter decided to return to work after the birth of Elise. Without ever judging, Marta offered her support and help, allowing Clara to pursue her career while knowing her children were in good hands. Clara, for her part, was there for Marta when she went through health problems a few years later. She accompanied her to her medical appointments, made sure she followed her treatment, and made sure she never felt alone. Pedro watched this development with a mixture of joy and admiration. One evening, when the children were in bed and enjoying some quiet time, he said to Clara, "You know, I often think how lucky we are. Not only do we love each other, but we managed to create a united and loving family, and it's largely thanks to you." Clara smiles, touched by these words. "It's thanks to all of us, Pedro. We all tried. We all grew." They remained silent for a moment, enjoying the peace of their home. Then Clara added softly, "You know, I think this experience made us stronger. Not just as a couple, but also as individuals. We learned to communicate, to forgive, to see beyond our first impressions." Pedro nodded. "It's true. And I think it will help us be better parents to Thomas and Elise. We will be able to teach them the importance of communication, of forgiveness, of family. Clara snuggled up to Pedro, thinking about everything they had been through. She thought of the young woman she was at the beginning of her marriage, scared and angry at her mother-in-law's hostility. She thought of Marta, prisoner of her fears and her prejudices. And she thought of what they had become, two strong women, united by the love they had for their family. You know, she told Pedro, I think this story transformed us all. We all grew, we all learned. And in the end, we came out stronger and more united. Pedro tenderly kissed Clara's forehead. You're right, my love. And I can't wait to see what the future holds. As they fell asleep that night, Clara felt filled with deep gratitude. The path had not been easy, but each difficulty had brought them closer together, had strengthened their bonds. Their family wasn't perfect, no family is, but it was filled with love, understanding and mutual support. And this, Clara realized, was the true new beginning they had all earned. Not a magical erasure of the past, but an evolution, a transformation that had led them all towards a better version of themselves. With that comforting thought, she fell asleep, ready to face whatever the future held, knowing that together, they could overcome anything.